everybody? Oh! This is the best I've felt in about a week, man. I've been pretty sick. I haven't been feeling good. I was pretty busy. Came home, took a algebra quiz because I'm in college, Got a 90 on that thing. Then I put meatloaf in the oven. Whoop, knocked over my cologne. This cologne, by the way. This good stuff. Only the finest. Hold up, y'all. Hold up. Mm. Yummy. Now, even though nobody's here, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about this video because I got something else I need to do. Yes and no. It depends. That means Packer Savage, screw you. No, I'm just kidding, man. As soon as I said that, he left. It depends. That means if Florida State holds their own, see, their schedule's not exactly an easy one. They got Clemson and Clemson. They got to play Miami. That's always a tough game. I don't care what people are saying about Miami last year. Miami's going to be 10 times better than what they were this past year. Let's see. They have Virginia Tech. I know it's a home game, but we all know what happened last time Virginia Tech went to Florida State. They beat them by 3 scores. Boston College, and they're usually not a terrible team, but they usually give Florida State a fight, especially in Boston College. It's at Boston College this year, so that's always possible. Yeah, so we'll see. I will say this. I do think Florida State's good enough to beat Clemson one time if they play each other twice. I don't think they can beat Clemson twice. They're not beating them in Death Valley this year. That's my opinion. Why? Because I think Florida State's going to get better, but I think Clemson is also going to get better. See, this past year, I was right and I was wrong about Clemson. I was right saying that their defense was going to regress. It wasn't going to be as good because Brent Venables wasn't there anymore. I was also right about their offense not being as good. The running game was going to be good, but predictable because Shipley had already played as a freshman. He played really good. So people were going to bottle him up more. And I was right about DJ Uyunglele. I said he wasn't very good. And people said, well, he was hurt and this and that. Well, he wasn't very good. Some of the throws he was making, the decisions that he was making as a passer were very, very questionable. And I felt like, well, I do think he'll get better in some areas, but overall, he's not going to get a heck of a lot better. He's going to hold them back, and he did. That's why they lost to South Carolina, and he's the reason why they lost, I wouldn't say Notre Dame. Notre Dame just won the line of scrimmage, but that's besides the point. They would have beat South Carolina at home if he was any good. That's my point. Nothing against him, but that's just my opinion, is what it is. I do think that the offense itself is going to play better now that the offensive coordinator is gone. I think that now that what's his name, Cade Klubnik, he had a good Orange Bowl actually. I don't know why people say he didn't do anything. He did pretty darn good. I thought he did a fantastic job throwing the football around, making plays through the air, being able to run. I thought he's a guy that could do it all. I'm not saying he's on the level of Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson or anything like that, but I do think he's good enough to take his team to a playoff at minimum, especially with all the talent around him. He can win the whole doggone thing. So we'll see. The reason why I don't think Florida State will beat them in Death Valley is because they haven't done it in 10 years. Secondly, Clemson doesn't lose at home. They just don't, I should have stuck to my South Carolina prediction before the season started. I said South Carolina was going to go around, mess around, and beat them. I didn't even have a good reason, but I just said that South Carolina was going to win the game. Unfortunately, game week this past year, I picked South Carolina to lose at Clemson because of that. It was at Clemson, and it felt like the right pick to make. But heck, I made a lot of picks that week that weren't right. But that's besides the point. Moving on. But I do think if is a big if Florida State does what they're supposed to do, as far as making plays offensively, their defense steps up and makes more plays on the as far as the trenches go. Think about it. They lost to Clemson because of that defensive line that they had. They were not healthy on the defensive front. They were overmatched in their losses to Wake Forest and Clemson. Their defensive line couldn't really do a whole lot because they were, again, undersized. In my opinion, I felt like they were undersized and they were outmatched. And that's just what it is. Now, I think the defensive line, I don't think it really got a whole lot better after that game. I just think they learned to play together more. If they do, that wouldn't be a good idea. I think they should stay in the ACC. That's just my opinion. Florida State, I think they can play in the SEC. I think they can play in any conference, especially with Norvell being there. That's my opinion. But as far as winning a conference every year or at least competing in it and being relevant again, like they are now, I think Florida State needs to keep their butts in the ACC. Not that they couldn't do it. I don't think they need to go over there though. There's too much competition over there. That's just being a realist, you know. You got Alabama, you got A&M. That'd be interesting to see Florida State and Texas A&M play because Jimbo, his last coaching job was at Florida State University. So that'd be an interesting matchup. Other than that, I don't really want to see FSU mess around with anybody from the SEC more than I have to. Not the big profile schools, even the smaller ones like Kentucky and Ole Miss. Although I think Ole Miss is in the right direction. Auburn, uh, Florida, who I think is going to be better in 2023. I don't want Florida State messing with them. If they don't have to, you're a good football team like Florida State, but you have weaknesses like Florida State does, like on the defensive line as far as this past year. Your running game was good, but when you were challenged, what do I mean by challenge? I mean, in Florida, they weren't really good at stopping Florida State's run game, but there were times where they were able to blow up the offensive line and stop it. Oklahoma's defense was not good, but they were able to shut down Florida State's running game outside the 35, 40-yard touchdown run, whatever it was. It's the play that they made against Oklahoma where Florida State's defense recovered a fumble and Trayshawn Ward ran it for like a 35, 40-yard touchdown run right after that. Other than that, they got shut down. So Florida State has a lot of weaknesses to where if they had to go to the SEC, I know it doesn't make much sense, but I guess it does. If they had to go mess with a team like Auburn or Kentucky, who's known to have good defenses, I think Auburn's going to have a really good defense with Hugh Freeze being there his first year. He's going to make a big impact on that team. They could lose. So as far as them going there, I don't think they need to. I think they just need to. If they were to go to the SEC, I'd be more comfortable after another 2 or 3 years as far as recruiting. Okay? Because the main reason why Florida State's been getting better with Norvell is because of the transfer portal, the players. The recruiting hasn't really been great. I think it's better now than what it was for a while, but it's still not elite. I'll put it to you this way. The best team in the country, Georgia. If Florida State had to play Georgia right now, I do think Florida State's offense would give them problems just because they give everybody's defense problems. But they would not compete with Georgia. They wouldn't beat them because of the elite athletes that Georgia has that Florida State just doesn't have yet. Again, it's not to say that Florida State sucks or anything. They obviously don't. They finished in the top 15, which I thought they would after the Clemson game. I said, well, this is a top 15 team. Maybe top 10 if they're lucky, but yeah. Yeah, Norvell, I agree, Moneyline, I agree. But that would take time to build FSU up. FSU really needs to establish that better. They need to recruit better. Norvell has to recruit better. You can't just do good in the transfer portal because the only downside is, luckily, Johnny Wilson and a lot of other guys from that transfer portal, like Benson, they all stayed. If they hadn't stayed, what would he do if they would have left? And let's say they're going to the SEC now, they'd have good chances to succeed. But again, they don't have, if they had to play, again, Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State, Florida State wouldn't be able to play with those teams right now, you know? I mean, not to say that they couldn't play with them, but I wouldn't put money on them to beat them. I think that'd be hard to deal with because of their offense. And that's the thing with Norvell. I've noticed that their offenses have been very explosive under Norvell. They've always made explosive plays. 2020 against Notre Dame, they had a chance with Notre Dame. Not a chance, but they were competitive in that game point-wise because of explosive plays. And 2021, they're 5-7. They won North Carolina, and they beat Miami for the first time in a long time because of the offense making explosive plays. I just think it's the defense. That's going to be a problem for something that Norvell has to overcome in his Florida State coaching career. That'll be the thing. But again, now Florida State's not at the point where I think if they went to the SEC and they had to play all the best teams, they'd lose to them all. No, I think Florida State could play with Texas A&M. I think they could play with Ole Miss, Mississippi State. They could play with Kentucky because Kentucky's got a good defense to give anybody problems, you know. But do I see them competing with the likes of Alabama or Georgia or anybody like that, or even an LSU if they had to play again after getting a win over them last year? No. LSU's got a lot more talent than Florida State, you know, so that's just being realistic. But yet I'm picking them to beat LSU because it's in the state of Florida, and Florida State's already played with them. But I do think Florida State has the line of scrimmage to play with anybody. They're really strong up front. That's a big part of why they beat LSU this past year, the line of scrimmage, you know. And I don't think that's why they beat LSU again. Like I said, I think Jordan Travis is a better quarterback than Jaden Daniels, throwing and running. Because Jaden's more of a runner. He's never been great at passing the football, especially this past year. They won a lot of games converting third down because he could run good, you know. There's just levels to college football. Florida State's a top 15 team. They're barely in the top 10. If I was being generous, they're barely a top 10 team. Because again, I don't think they can compete and beat teams like Georgia or Ohio State or Michigan right now. As far as the winning and how they win games, Florida State still has to prove that they can stop the run with anybody that they play. They couldn't do that with Clemson, and Clemson proved to not really be a great football team this year. They lost to Notre Dame the way they did, and Notre Dame wasn't a top 10, 15 team this past year. And they ran over Clemson. Florida State couldn't really compete with Clemson until Clemson let them come back in there. If I'm being real. And these 6 and 7 teams like Florida, get they had down years, but still, if you're Florida State, you need to blow these teams out. You couldn't. So that tells me you'll have a hard time competing with someone like Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State or Michigan or, you know what I mean, is what it is. That's just if I'm being real. I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't panic if they had to go to the SEC, though, if I'm being honest. I think they'd be okay. They just wouldn't be where I want them to be. That's in the playoff. I'll put it to you this way. Florida State, if they want to go to the playoff every year, they need to keep their butts in the ACC because it's far less competitive and the athletes aren't as elite as they are in the SEC. You're more likely to lose games you shouldn't lose or games you are expected to lose in the SEC versus doing it in the ACC. That's why I don't think Ohio State would go anywhere else either. They normally would beat everybody in their conference. I say normally because Michigan, their daddy. This is only to the fans that run their mouth, but that's besides the point. The point is, yeah. But we'll see. We'll see what they come up with. I like Florida State's chances of being very successful. I do think they'll win at least 10 games, if not more, in 2023. But they got, again, run defense has got to improve. Their defensive front has got to improve. That's a must. That's just my opinion. How many games do I think that Texas will win? That's a good question. If everything goes like I think it will realistically, I think Texas will lose to Alabama on the road. I think that they'll lose to TCU again because this game's at TCU this year, and TCU's got something good going on. That man's been bringing in players. Sonny Dykes, he's been getting some players to come to his team, so he's going to do a lot more. They'll probably lose to Oklahoma State again because they haven't beat them in 3 years coming this year. They usually lose to Mike Gundy for some reason. They might lose to Kansas for all I know. I know it's in Texas, but the last time it was in Texas, they lost to them. And they're not going to have that run game nowhere near as powerful as it was this past year. And again, as a Texas fan, am I a Texas fan? Of course I am. Look, I got the jersey to prove it. They might win 8 or 9 games. And if that's the case, Coach Sark needs to go. Because again, that man has way too much talent. And I've argued with Florida State fans thinking, well, that man shouldn't go. Here's the thing. Norvell's first year in Florida State, he didn't have much to work with as far as talent. And recruiting was crap. Even now it's not great. But and let's be honest, Norvell doesn't, if the transfer portal wasn't as big as it is now, Florida State would not be winning 10 games. But he's able to do it. Sark has elite players there and the transfer portal. That's how he got Ewers to go to Texas. And you still can't win 10 games in your second year with the best running back in college football, in my opinion, outside of Blake Corum because he got hurt. Man, no, get out of here. Oklahoma, you beat them like you're supposed to. You were at home against Alabama, who probably took you lightly. You should have won that game. I don't care if Quinn got hurt or not. You should have won that game. You got athletes just as good as Alabama, recruiting-wise, okay? You should have beat Oklahoma State. You should have at least beat or come close to beating TCU. You shouldn't have been close with Iowa State, who was terrible, all right? And Kansas State, well, you beat Kansas State and Baylor, but you're supposed to beat those teams. You're better. You're Texas. You got players there. There's no excuses. Texas Tech, don't even get me started with that crap. Texas, now if everything goes right for Texas and Sark proves, hey, I'm for real, he'll beat Alabama somehow or at least lose a competitive game. He's going to beat the teams he's supposed to beat, like Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, TCU. He'll beat those teams, and he'll beat Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma and Texas is going to be a really good game. They're not going to run through Oklahoma like they did. Oklahoma didn't even have in that game, you know? I still think they would have lost to Texas, but it wouldn't have been that bad as the scoreboard said, in my opinion. It was competitive for a little while. They just went for it on fourth down a few times, and the game got away from them. And yes, I'm a Texas fan admitting that, you know? Yeah, that's what it is. Uh, but it just all depends. If things go right, Texas does really good. They win at least 10 games or more, and they win the Big 12. They need to win it this year. But TCU's in their way. You know, and I don't think they can beat TCU this year either. I really don't. That game's in TCU. TCU has owned Texas. Look at the stats. TCU has beaten Texas more times than Texas has beaten them in recent history. That's just what it is. But do I think they can beat TCU if they play twice, like once in the regular year and then again in the Big 12 title game? Absolutely. TCU has already proven that they can beat Kansas State one time, then play them again. They can lose, so Texas can surely do that, but we'll see. Texas needs to. They have a lot to prove. Too much talent, not enough to back it up as far as winning games. Kind of disappointing. Any other questions from anybody before I get off? Because I got something else I need to do. Surprised nobody's asking me about Michigan or Penn State, the other schools. Wisconsin. What about Wisconsin? Wisconsin's got a new coach. They got Luke Fickell there. Nobody's asking me about that. What I think of Wisconsin. I'll tell you right now, I see Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship. That man is going to do something this year. I don't think they'll win the Big Ten. I don't think they're winning 10 games. They're going to give Ohio State a fight, I think. I think they're going to compete with a lot of teams they should be able to compete with. Next coach, and that's the thing. I don't know. I really don't know, you know? But we'll see. If I wanted a coach to go there, oh, if Urban Meyer was available, he needs to go to Texas. All jokes aside, I'm laughing because I don't think he'll coach college football again. But if he did, he'd be a good coach to go there. He'll win games. You can call him what you want. He has a history of lying and all this other stuff, but he's a winner. And he's won national championships everywhere he's been for the last two college teams, Florida and Ohio State. So he can really do it over there. And he's been in the SEC before, so if he becomes a coach, it'll be 2024, their first year in the SEC. So if he doesn't win the SEC, he can at least win some games and bring Texas some respect to their name. Lincoln Riley. I had somebody ask me about Lincoln Riley in person, not on my channel. I laughed in their faces. And they got, why would you laugh? USC is going to be good next year. No, they ain't. That defense is going to suck again. Oh, it's Oklahoma of the Pac-12. Great offense, no defense. How in the world do you lose to Tulane in that Cotton Bowl? Good grief. Man, get out of here. You ain't going to win nothing. Now everybody has played Caleb Williams from the Pac-12. So they're going to be able to game plan better for him. He's going to throw more interceptions. He's not going to have another Heisman season. And that defense is not going to be any better. So what makes you think they're going to be better and make the playoffs? Man, no. If anybody from the Pac-12 does anything, it's going to be Washington. They're going to be really good. Outside of that, everybody else can take a seat. They can sit down somewhere. Utah, they ain't done nothing yet besides win the conference. They can't even make a playoff. I don't think they have the talent to do it. Oregon, nah. Anybody else? Nope. Just Washington. They're the biggest threat this year from that conference. But this video is supposed to be about Florida State, but yet here I am talking about everybody else. That's okay, though. It's part of my channel. Nothing makes sense, but it does because it's college football. With that being said, I'm going to get off and do what I got to do. I'll see you guys later. You guys have a great night. Hook 'em horns. Go Noles. Go Blue. Go Ducks. War Eagle. And go Irish.